Hey guys, tonight we're venturing way back like 10,000 years back into a world that feels as strange as it is sleepy. Imagine these towering ferns swaying gently in the misty air, the faint rustle of foliage as something massive brushes past. No, it's not a dinosaur. Those guys are long gone. Instead, you hear a deep rhythmic thump. Thump, thump. And there it is, a giant ground sloth, 7 feet tall at the shoulder, looking vaguely like a bear who forgot how to hurry. Its fur is shaggy and streaked with mud. Its nose twitches slowly as it sniffs the air, lumbering past ancient trees and stepping over rocks like it's walking in a dream. It's got claws longer than your head, but they're not for fighting. They're for gardening. Slow motion gardening. You're in the Pleistocene now, and spoiler alert, you probably wouldn't survive this age. Between the saber-toothed cats, the mammoths, and oh yeah, the infectious diseases, your odds are not great. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and what time it is where you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the misty undergrowth following this enormous slow-moving beast. It's not even aware of you, or maybe it just doesn't care. Because when you're this big and this slow, the world kind of shapes itself around you. The giant ground sloth, specifically, you're looking at a megatherium, isn't built for speed or stealth. It's built for patience, for reaching, raking, and chewing its way through a prehistoric buffet line of vegetation. Its fur glistens with dew. You notice something weird. There's moss growing on its back, like real moss. It looks less like an animal and more like a moving garden statue. Some scientists think this actually happened algae, or even little plants hitching a ride on its fur, basically turning the sloth into a walking ecosystem. A whole mini-world lumbering through a bigger one. You walk beside it, your footsteps crunching in its massive footprints. Its hind feet curve inward, almost pigeon-toed. That's not a design flaw, it's because its claws are so long it has to walk on the sides of its feet, like it's wearing invisible flip-flops. Not graceful, but surprisingly effective. Now, here's a mainstream historical fact to sprinkle in your brain. Giant ground sloths roamed from South America up through parts of North America, especially after the Great American Biotic Interchange, about 3 million years ago. That's when the land bridge formed between the continents and animals did a weird slow-motion swap. Sloths headed north and saber-toothed cats went south. It was like an ancient, very dangerous game of Red Rover. The air smells of wet earth and crushed leaves. A distant rumble of thunder rolls over the tree canopy. This place is humid, wild, and echoing with bird calls you've never heard before. But through it all, the sloth remains calm. Its movements are deliberate, like it's operating on a different clock than everything else. A clock that's lost its second hand. Now, historians still argue whether these beasts were solitary or social. Some think they were lone wanderers, each with a slow-motion schedule and zero need for company. Others suggest there's evident scratch marks in shared cave systems, overlapping fossil remains that maybe they hung out in loose groups, like a very chill prehistoric book club. And here's your first quirky fringe tidbit. Of the night, some indigenous South American legends speak of a creature called the mapinguari, a smelly, shaggy giant with long claws and a mouth on its stomach. Sound familiar? Yeah. Some cryptozoologists have proposed that this myth is a cultural memory of ground sloths lingering in the Amazon longer than we thought. Or maybe it's just what happens when you mix sloths and too much fermented fruit. You keep moving. The ground gets soggier and your guide, the sloth, pauses at a tree. Not just any tree, a massive fruit-bearing thing with leaves as big as your torso. The sloth rears up on its hind legs, balancing like a sumo wrestler doing ballet. It grips the trunk with one arm and with the other slowly pulls a branch downward. The fruit gives way and the sloth devours it in slow, satisfied bites. This simple act is more important than it looks. See, this sloth isn't just eating. It's performing essential environmental maintenance. As it grazes, it prunes the trees. As it poops, it fertilizes the forest. And when it moves, it clears trails other animals will use. It's like nature's quiet landscaper shaping the forest over centuries, one snack at a time. You crouch and notice its droppings, enormous, tidy piles almost artfully placed. Honestly, if you weren't looking closely, you'd think it was some kind of weird forest sculpture. Scientists analyzing fossilized dung, yes, that's a real job, have found pollen seeds and even tiny bits of charcoal. Some sloths may have been attracted to areas after natural fires, munching on the fresh regrowth like it was gourmet salad. The ground sloth shifts its weight again, and you feel the vibrations through your feet. It's like being near a mobile, mossy boulder with opinions about which tree tastes best. You reach out, not to touch it, just to get closer, and for a second it turns its head. You lock eyes. Its gaze is slow, thoughtful, and somehow older than time. Then it turns back, grabs another fruit and chomps. The sun is starting to set, casting golden streaks through the branches. The sloth begins to move again, heading toward a darker patch of woods. You follow, careful not to trip on twisted roots or your own awe. This is just the beginning of your journey with one of nature's gentlest giants. And trust me, things are going to get weirder and slower before they get clearer. You're still following the sloth as twilight thickens into night. The forest changes. Cicadas take up the soundtrack now, buzzing lazily in the warm air. It's darker here, quieter, except for the rhythmic squish of your footsteps and the occasional wet plop of a fruit falling from above. And just ahead, your companion pauses. You squint, watching this tower of fur, and muscle and claws ease itself upright again, like a furry forklift, loading invisible cargo. The sloth is hungry again, which makes sense when you weigh over 4 tons, and your diet is 100% leafy. Fiber dinner never really ends. You stare at those claws as it drags one down a tree trunk. They're enormous, up to 2 feet long, and curved, almost sickle-shaped. They don't slice or stab. They hook, perfect for snagging branches and dragging them downward like salad tongs, designed by a prehistoric goth. One claw twitches near your face as it slowly lowers a branch. You flinch, not because it's dangerous, spoiler, it's not, unless you're a slow-moving shrub, but because it's weirdly elegant. Graceful in a lumbering tree-hugging sort of way. Like watching ballet underwater choreographed by someone who thinks walking speed limits are too fast. Now, this particular species, Megatherium americanum, is one of the largest ground sloths ever. Discovered in the 18th century by the famous naturalist Georges Cuvier, it was a game-changer for paleontology. Back then, people were still debating whether extinction was even a real thing. Surely God wouldn't just let a creature go away, they said. Then Megatherium showed up like, hey guys, I'm dead. Sorry, that shifted the narrative real quick. You find a moment to crouch and examine the tree itself. The bark is scratched deep parallel grooves from generations of sloths, just like this one pulling the same branches down. It's almost a signature. A forest full of quiet sloth graffiti. Now, here's your quirky tidbit. Some scientists believe ground sloths were left-handed, or rather left-clawed. Fossilized bones often show more wear on the left limbs, suggesting a preference maybe from leaning into trees, the same way every time, or just being stubbornly sloth quirky. Imagine having a dominant paw and using it to yank tree limbs instead of sign birthday cards. As your sloth eats, you notice it doesn't chew like a horse or a cow. No, it sort of grinds. Their teeth don't have enamel. Instead, they're made of layers of dentin that self-sharpen as they wear down. Picture a woodworker constantly sanding their tools just by using them. It's weird but effective, which is kind of this sloth's whole thing. Historians still argue whether sloths were purely leaf eaters or if they occasionally munched on something a bit more surprising. Some fringe theories backed by curious tooth marks on bones suggest they may have scavenged meat once in a blue moon. But let's be honest, imagining this slow, sleepy beast going full carnivore is like imagining a houseplant growing fangs. Possible maybe, likely, not really. Still, it raises interesting thoughts. Because even though they were plant-based giants, they weren't simple. They were engineers. Not with tools, but with movement and digestion. Everything about their bodies screams inefficient, but in truth, they were optimized for exactly their pace. And pace in a world of predators matters. You hear a distant howl, sharp and eerie. Maybe a saber-toothed cat. Maybe just a coyote with a better PR team. Either way, your sloth doesn't react, doesn't even flinch. You half expect it to mutter, "Too old for this nonsense," but it just reaches for another bite. Its defense wasn't speed or hiding. It was size. A fully grown megatherium could knock over a predator just by falling in the right direction. And those claws. Not for fighting, but if pushed, they do the job. Picture a medieval knight with gardening tools and you're not far off. You notice the marks around the base of several nearby trees. Deep gouges like a slow-motion war zone. And some of the trees are bent. The sloth has been here before probably many times. These trees aren't just dinner, they're partners. It shapes them, and in return, they grow in weird ways that make them even easier to harvest. It's like watching a silent agreement play out over decades. The moon rises now, casting soft silver light over everything. Your sloth keeps moving and you stumble behind, tripping on vines. It stops near a patch of soft earth and begins pawing at it, not digging deep, just rearranging the top layer. Dust and leaves swirl. Then it settles down, curling partially around its own massive limbs, eyes half closed. You sit too, because you need a break, and honestly, your legs are starting to feel like they're made of 100% jelly. The forest hums. Bats flit above. The air grows cooler. And the sloth lets out a breath so long and slow it sounds like someone deflating a beanbag chair. Here's a fun mental image. To keep you company, some early scientists thought giant ground sloths might have hung from trees like their tiny modern cousins. They saw the long claws and got very excited. Then someone did the math. A full-grown megatherium would have needed a tree bigger than most office buildings just to dangle from. The idea was scrapped mostly. But it's still in a few dusty books if you're ever bored and feeling mischievous. So here you are, sitting next to a prehistoric gardener, watching moonlight dance across ferns while the ground slowly exhales warmth. The sloth is still now, except for the occasional flick of an ear or lazy scratch with its ridiculous claws. And you can't help but wonder, how did something this strange, this specialized, manage to thrive for so long? Because make no mistake, they weren't a fluke. Giant ground sloths were around for millions of years. They saw volcanic eruptions, rising seas, glacial advances. And through it all, they kept moving. Slowly, deliberately. You lie back in the underbrush, eyes barely open, and listen to the night. Your fingers twitch like sloth claws in your sleep. Tomorrow, you'll learn what happens when predators try to test the patience of a creature with time and claws on its side. Dawn filters through the canopy in milky streaks, and your eyelids flicker open to the earthy scent of wet leaves and prehistoric body odor. You blink, adjusting to the soft rustle of trees, and the low, almost inaudible groan from your enormous furry companion as it rises to its feet. The sloth is moving again, not quickly of course, that would be cheating. You get up stretching sore limbs, and follow as it shuffles through the forest, pressing through foliage like a giant, hairy snowplow. Something in its posture has changed, more alert, more careful. The slow grace remains, but the steps are quieter, heavier. You realize you've entered predator territory. And speaking of predators, this is where things get spicy. Sure, today's modern sloths avoid confrontation with the dedication of a teenager ignoring dishes. But their extinct cousins, different story. Giant ground sloths weren't built for fleeing. They were built for enduring, and sometimes when push came to literal shove, for fighting back. Imagine being a saber-toothed cat in South America during the Pleistocene. You're sleek, powerful. Your fangs are long enough to earn their own insurance policy, and you're hungry. Then you stumble across a megatherium, minding its own business, gnawing on a fig tree like a furry bulldozer. You think, yeah, I could take that. But here's the catch: if you misjudge, if you leap and miss, if you get swatted by one of those claws the size of canoe paddles, game over. You might laugh, but fossilized bones of saber-toothed cats have been found with trauma injuries. Broken skulls, snapped ribs that suggest they tangled with something big and regretted it. And guess who fits the bill? Still, paleontologists debate the details. Historians still argue whether giant sloths actively fought off predators or if their size and bulk were deterrents enough. Some believe the claws were for defense. Others insist they were purely foraging tools. But the truth might live in between. Because survival isn't about being the fastest or the strongest. Sometimes it's about being too much trouble to mess with. And there's more. Picture this: the giant short-faced bear, Arctodus simus. Towering nearly 12 feet tall on its hind legs, it was one of the most terrifying predators in prehistoric America. Fast, massive, and hungry. If any animal could challenge a sloth, it would be this walking wall of teeth and muscle. But even then, Megatherium held its ground. A standoff between them wouldn't have been some dramatic chase scene. It would have been a slow-motion stare-down, with two oversized monsters, sizing each other up like confused bouncers outside a nightclub. Sometimes the bear would win. Sometimes the sloth would. And sometimes they'd just walk away, mutually unimpressed. You duck under a vine as the sloth pauses, sniffing the air. You see tracks, huge ones, wide as manhole covers, with long claw grooves at the tips. But they're not fresh. Something passed through here recently, but not recently enough to matter. You press on your mind, wondering to how these animals coexisted with early humans. Yes, humans. Because by this time in history, they've arrived. Ancient humans in South and Central America didn't just spot these creatures, they interacted with them. Carvings and petroglyphs found in caves show what look suspiciously like sloths etched into stone. And even more startling evidence that sloths and humans may have shared some of the same caves at least for a while. Imagine cozying up for the night and hearing a deep, wheezy exhale in the dark. You light a torch, And oh, it's just your massive leaf-munching cave roommate again. Of course, the relationship didn't stay peaceful forever. You probably already guessed how that ends. But right now, in this moment, the balance is intact. The sloth continues onward, and you keep following your feet, wet from the morning dew. You pass a fallen tree ripped open at its base. The sloth stops to investigate, dragging claws along the splintered wood. There might be grubs inside, or maybe it's just curious. Because sloths weren't mindless slowpokes. Their brains were small, yes, but not useless. They understood patterns. They remembered trails. They made choices. And speaking of choices, did you know some species of giant ground sloths actually migrated? Yep. Fossilized footprints found in parts of South America suggest seasonal movement, slow, steady treks across the landscape, likely following food or climate shifts. These weren't random wanderers. They were following ancient sloth maps etched in instinct and generations of slow wisdom. One set of prints in Argentina preserved in soft mud turned to stone reveals something oddly touching. A sloth appears to pause mid-trackway. The prints widen the claw marks, dig in more deeply, then continue again, but slightly off course. Some scientists think the animal may have rested. Others wonder if it was startled or even wait for it dancing. Yes, that's a real theory. Was it shaking its leafy behind? Probably not. But hey, it's nice to dream. You round a bend and see something that holds your breath. Claw marks, fresh ones. Deep gouges in a tree and the muddy earth. A sign of conflict maybe. The sloth hesitates too. Its body language shifts, shoulders rising, head turning slowly as it sniffs again. But there's no sound. Whatever happened here, it's over. You walk carefully now, every step soft on the forest floor. The sun's fully risen light piercing through the green above. The sloth moves slower than usual. Yes, that's possible and seems to scan the area. You're not alone, but nothing stirs. No cats, no bears, no fellow sloths. Just silence and the low creak of trees. And here's a fun little fact to send you off. Sloth fur, especially the smaller modern kinds, often houses entire ecosystems. Algae grows in it. Moths lay eggs in it. The fur becomes a tiny jungle. Scientists think ancient sloths may have had similar setups, living cloaks of green and insects. Walking compost heaps, if you will. Grows a little. Genius, absolutely. You glance at your giant friend and notice something shifting in its coat. Maybe a beetle, or just a trick of light. Either way, it moves forward again, stomping softly claws, swaying like pendulums, always in rhythm. And you follow. Because that's what this journey is: slow steps, steady pace, ancient stories unfolding beneath your feet like vines parting before the sloth's march. Soon, you'll see how humans tip the balance, and how even giants can fall when patience is outmatched by precision and sharp tools. But not just yet. The sun hangs lazily overhead, now filtered through towering prehistoric ferns and liana vines that seem to droop in solidarity with your increasingly sluggish pace. The ground sloth hasn't broken a sweat, not that it really can. You, however, are damp, slightly scratched, and wondering if prehistoric humidity is nature's way of saying welcome to the jungle. Your companion trudges on, dragging its claws like it's drawing invisible lines into the earth. You glance around, realizing you've entered a different kind of terrain. Rockier, slightly elevated with scattered tree roots and occasional dry patches underfoot. The rainforest is thinning. And ahead, a curious depression in the ground, stretching out like a long, meandering trail. No vegetation, just fossil-stamped soil. And then it clicks. You're standing in an ancient sloth highway. No, seriously. Paleontologists have uncovered entire trackways, fossilized sloth footpaths worn into soft earth thousands of years ago and then preserved under just the right conditions. Some stretch for dozens of meters. These aren't just wandering paths. They're purposeful. A slow-motion pilgrimage, carved out over years, maybe even generations. Imagine it sloth after sloth, plodding along this same route, each step pressing just a little deeper into history. It's peaceful, almost sacred, until you notice something else. Scattered among the tracks, sharp, deliberate markings. Human footprints. They're smaller, lighter, and spaced differently. You can't miss the intent in them, following, not crossing. Almost chasing. Your stomach tenses. Because this isn't just a story about a gentle beast ambling through paradise. It's also about being hunted. By the time humans made it to South America, they weren't just clever, they were coordinated. They could strategize, set traps, anticipate movement. It didn't matter that the giant ground sloth was massive and clawed and slightly terrifying. What mattered was that it couldn't outrun a motivated human with a plan. And so the hunt began, not always successful, but often enough. Ancient kill sites show bones with cut marks, evidence that humans processed sloth meat with stone tools. Some even show signs of cooking. Charred bits of bone, fragmented skulls. A history of meals buried under time. Now here's where things get a little awkward. Because despite all the sloth's physical advantages, size, strength, claws long enough to scratch a thought into the sky, it wasn't built for panic. It couldn't bolt like a deer or climb like a monkey. Once it sensed danger, it probably froze. Or worse, stood its ground towering upright and waving those claws in one last, slow-motion display of "Don't mess with me," which probably worked until it didn't. And yet, not all human sloth encounters were deadly. Deep in a cave in Brazil called Lapa do Santo, archaeologists found something unusual. A carving etched into a wall depicting a figure that many believe to be a giant sloth, its arms outstretched, body upright, almost cartoonishly big. Next to it, a tiny human. There's no violence in the image, no spears or drama. Just coexistence or maybe reverence. Historians still argue whether this drawing shows a spiritual connection, a record of daily life, or just an ancient version of "I saw this cool thing once and had to draw it." But what's clear is that these creatures left a big impression, not just in the soil, but in the minds of early humans. And it wasn't just their meat that humans valued. Sloth bones were repurposed into tools, skulls used as containers or ceremonial objects. Some scientists even suggest that the fur might have been collected dense and coarse enough to be woven, though no direct samples have survived. The point is, humans didn't just kill the sloth. They integrated it. And speaking of bones, how about a quirky little detour? There's a curious fact floating around paleontology circles about a certain cave in Uruguay. Inside, researchers discovered coprolites, fossilized poop in case your middle school self needed a chuckle, and identified them as sloth droppings. But here's the kicker. The poop was neatly arranged, almost piled intentionally. Some scientists believe sloths may have returned to the same spots to relieve themselves, basically prehistoric latrines. Nature's most patient bathroom line. And if you think that's gross, consider this by studying those fossilized droppings. Researchers have been able to reconstruct the ancient diets of these creatures, fruit leaves, maybe even small flowers or bark. One sloth's final snack becomes a researcher's breakfast. Read 10,000 years later. Circle of life. The sloth beside you rumbles softly, nosing at a tree stump, before letting out a long, wheezy sigh. You can't help but wonder, did it know its ancestors were hunted, that it was once revered and feared, and finally pushed to the edge by sharp stones and clever traps? Probably not, but instinct lingers past through time like a story half remembered. You press on. The ancient trail fades into mossy rock, and the forest returns dense and humming. Birds chirp overhead, but none of them seem to notice you. Maybe they're used to this path. Maybe they know the story already. Then a clearing, wide and sunlit. In the center stands a lonely boulder, with strained scratches, tall vertical gouges, like something tried to climb or mark territory. You reach out and feel the grooves. Too high for humans. Too deliberate for an accident. Maybe it was just a bored sloth sharpening its claws. Or maybe, just maybe, it was an old giant leaving a message for anyone who came after I was here. I mattered. The breeze rustles your hair. The sloth steps forward and brushes past you almost gently, and continues walking out of the clearing and into shadow again. And just like that, you realize something odd. You're no longer just observing. You're part of the trackway now. Your footprints fall in line with those ancient ones, each step a quiet echo of the ones before it. Human and sloth, predator and prey, dreamer and drifter, sharing the same stretch of earth for a little while longer. There's more to see, more to remember, and a few more ancient mysteries waiting up ahead, like just how far these beasts wandered and what happened when the weather stopped playing nice. But that comes next. You blink against the sunlight as you press forward, following the gentle sway of your giant, slow-moving friend through the underbrush. Trees begin to thin. The air shifts. Drier. Lighter. You're moving into open terrain now. Less rainforest. More grassland, punctuated by occasional shrubs and scattered trees that look like they're trying to remember how to be forests. Your sloth companion pauses, lifting its shaggy head to sniff the air. It's not just walking aimlessly, there's direction to this. You're on a migration path. Not some frantic herd stampede, but a patient, deliberate movement. Because these sloths, they didn't just live in one little patch of paradise. Oh no, they traveled. Thin, long lumbering treks across plains, valleys, even up mountain slopes. Giant ground sloths were found all over the Americas north-central south. Fossils have turned up in Argentina, the American Midwest, even way up in Alaska. Yep, Alaska. These were not stay-at-home types. And sure, their pace would make a modern commuter weep, but it worked. When you're the size of a car and can digest fibrous leaves like a walking compost bin, you don't need to sprint. You just need time and patience. And about 3 days to cross what today would be a parking lot. But here's where things get complicated. You reach a gentle rise and look out over a valley, broad, golden, and oddly empty. You can almost see them now, dozens of sloths, spaced out like grazing elephants, each ambling towards some known invisible destination. It looks peaceful. But it wasn't always, because the world was changing beneath their feet. Let's talk Ice Age. The Pleistocene epoch, which sounds like a fancy cocktail but is really just the last few million years of serious weather drama, was no gentle climate cruise. Glaciers expanded and contracted like indecisive landlords. Habitats shifted. Food sources vanished. Water froze. Then melted. Then froze again. And right in the middle of it, our fuzzy, slightly confused heroes. Sea sloths weren't just tropical. Some species adapted to cold climates. The megalonyx, for instance. Literally, giant claw roamed temperate North America. Thomas Jefferson even studied its bones and thought it was a lion. Historians still argue whether he was serious or just having a weird science day. In fact, that's why one species is literally named Megalonyx jeffersoni, because nothing says presidential legacy like a prehistoric slow-motion bulldozer. But the environment didn't care about legacies. It kept changing. Grasslands turned to deserts. Forests shrank. The great food buffet started shutting down. And if you're a sloth that needs 60 pounds of leafy greens every day, that's a big problem. Suddenly, migration wasn't just a seasonal stroll, it was survival. They had to move farther to find food, follow shrinking rivers, climb to where trees still clung to rocky soil. And it wasn't just nature pushing them around. Remember those pesky humans from earlier? Yeah, they started following too. And not just with spears. As humans spread across the continents, they did what humans do best. They built fires, altered landscapes, and over time reshaped entire ecosystems. Some scientists argue that it was the combo of climate change and human presence that really started grinding the sloth's gears. Others insist it was mostly humans. And still others think the climate had already sealed the sloth's fate, and we just sped things up. Historians still argue whether the extinction of giant sloths was a tragic inevitability or a case of death by 1,000 little disruptions each one, pushing them a little closer to the edge. Meanwhile, you and your furry friend descend into the valley, passing the bleached remains of something ancient, a ribcage maybe, half buried, long forgotten. A gentle reminder that for every sloth that wandered these paths, not all made it through. But the sloth trudges on. It always does. Let's take a moment for a fun little fringe theory though. Because what's a bedtime journey without a bit of mystery? In the 18th and 19th centuries, reports started popping up from South America. Locals in remote jungles whispered of mapinguari, a creature said to be as tall as a man with shaggy red fur, long claws, and a smell so horrific it could make flowers wilt. Some said it had a backward-facing mouth on its stomach. Others claimed it let out ear-splitting roars and could crush trees just by leaning on them. Most scientists chalk this up to mythology, but some paleontologists raised an eyebrow. Could it be a lingering legend of the giant ground sloth, passed down orally through generations, evolving into folklore? No one's found proof, but the Amazon's a big place. And who's to say what lumbers just out of sight? Back in your journey, the wind picks up. A chill rolls through the valley. Your sloth shudders more from instinct than cold and veers toward a cluster of trees near a stream. Water glistens in the sun, reflecting sky and leaf and the ghost of a world that used to be teeming with slow giants. You crouch to drink, feeling the cool ripple through your hands. And for a second, you imagine this valley as it once was, dozens of sloths, sipping, lounging, tearing at trees, with those meter-long claws like furry gardeners who never got the memo about landscaping speed. Because here's the thing, despite all the odds stacked against them, they lasted for millions of years, across continents, through ice and heat and the occasional ambitious saber-tooth. That's not failure. That's resilience in slow motion. The sloth shakes itself off and looks at you, and you swear for one surreal second it knows. Not the details, not the extinction curves, or paleoecological shifts, but the weight of the story you're stepping through. A story of motion migration, and the struggle to keep going when everything around you is shifting. You look back the way you came. The tracks are already vanishing in the wind. Time to move forward. The path ahead winds uphill again into a region where the trees grow taller, their branches arching overhead like ancient cathedral ceilings. You trail behind the sloth, its white feet squishing gently into damp moss. With each ponderous step, there's a calm to the rhythm, the way it brushes its claws through low-hanging vines, the casual crunch of leaves underfoot. But as you follow, you start to notice something strange. The forest is dotted with toppled trees, snapped trunks, bark, stripped clean branches yanked down as though by an oversized toddler on a sugar high. Welcome to the original landscaping crew. Giant ground sloths were not just passive wanderers, they were literal ecosystem engineers. Imagine a creature the size of a minivan, trundling through forests and knocking over trees to get at the tender leaves at the top, not by climbing or reaching, mind you, but by just casually pushing them over. Like timber, I wanted a snack, and it wasn't just for food. As they tore down trees and cleared underbrush, they made space. Light flooded the forest floor. New plants sprouted in the gaps. Other animals, small herbivores, nesting birds, bugs took advantage. It was chaos. It was beautiful. It was a slow-motion remodel of the prehistoric world. This is what ecologists call disturbance ecology. The idea that some creatures, through their habits, reshape entire environments. And giant ground sloths, they were pros. Think of them as the world's slowest gardeners. But instead of pruning shears, they use claws like sickles and brute strength. Where modern elephants uproot shrubs with their trunks, sloths just leaned in and let gravity do the rest. Efficient if a little dramatic. But here's where things get juicy. Scientists believe that many modern ecosystems still carry the fingerprints claw prints of these ancient landscapers. Certain trees in the Amazon produce huge fruits, too large for today's wildlife to eat or disperse efficiently. So, who were they meant for? Yep, you guessed it, giant sloths. Take the avocado. Delicious, creamy, and kind of awkward if you're trying to eat one with dignity. Its seed is massive, too big for most modern animals to swallow. But back in the day, perfect size for a ground sloth's lunch. They'd chomp it down, seed and all, and later redeposit it somewhere else. Voila, tree planting. Same goes for the Brazil nut tree and the calabash tree. Their fruit design hints at an evolutionary partnership with megafauna that vanished thousands of years ago. These trees may have evolved to be eaten by extinction. Now they're still here, confused and waiting for a gardener who never returned. Historians still argue whether the extinction of megafauna, like giant sloths, caused a cascade of changes that forever altered plant evolution, or if plants simply adapted to new dispersers in the millennia since. Either way, every fruit you bite into, with a huge seed, is carrying echoes of a vanished friend. As you walk deeper into the forest, you pass a tree with wide spreading roots, and a trunk that bulges like it's holding its breath. High above, birds shriek and wheel between branches. The forest is thick with buzzing insects, rustling mammals, and somewhere in the distance, a low roar. Not a predator, just thunder rolling over mountains. The sloth reaches up, curling one giant claw around the vine and giving it a slow, deliberate yank. Leaves shower down around you like green confetti. It's a full-body reach, hind legs bracing back, flexing head, tilted up like it's reaching for the last cookie on the top shelf. Then, snap! The vine comes loose. The sloth sits back on its haunches and munches quietly. The whole operation took maybe 2 minutes. You could have made a sandwich in that time. And yet it works. It always worked. But then something shifts in the forest. A crack, a thud. You turn sharply. Not far off, there's a gap in the foliage. A tree has fallen not from the sloth, but from age rot, or the weight of too many past disruptions. Around it, the earth has eroded. The roots, once cradled in rich soil, now dangle like exposed nerves. This is what happens when the gardener disappears. Without large animals to maintain the clearings, forests change. Canopy thickens. Some plants take over. Others vanish. Species that depended on open areas shrink in number. Some go extinct. It's not immediate. It's not dramatic. It's just slow decay. Kind of ironic, really, because here's the kicker even now. Long after they vanished, researchers are studying how to bring back these effects. Not the sloths themselves yet, but the role they played. There's a movement called rewilding. The idea is to restore lost ecosystem functions by using similar living animals. Elephants in South America, tapirs in degraded rainforests, even humans planting seeds manually to mimic megafauna poop. Imagine putting that on your resume, professional megafauna substitute. And there are still faint echoes of sloths' old roots, paths worn deep into the landscape, fossilized dung heaps, fruit trees in weird places. Nature remembers even if we forget. You crouch near a stream, scooping a handful of water to your face. The sloth ambles on, leaving a trail of snapped stems and bent grass behind. Somewhere nearby, a spider monkey watches tail flicking. And you can't help but smile. This isn't destruction. It's creation in its slowest, gentlest form. Before you move on, here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. Giant ground sloths may have carried their own mini ecosystems in their fur. That dense, coarse hair, it was a haven for algae beetles, even tiny moths. Like a walk-in hotel, greenish tint included. So basically, they were mobile compost bins, complete with room service. As you rejoin your companion and press onward through the forest, you realize you've stopped noticing the passage of time. Everything has slowed to the pace of the sloth. Thoughtful, unrushed, just the way these gentle gardeners would have liked it. The forest begins to thin. Not entirely, just enough for more sunlight to dapple the ground, forming gold-flecked pools, where moss sparkles and insects flit lazily about. Your giant companion pauses, nose twitching slightly, as if remembering a scent from a lifetime ago. You follow quietly, careful, not to disturb the fragile stillness, though every step you take crunches against something leaves twigs bones. Yes, bones. They're scattered now just beneath the underbrush, sun-bleached ribs curled like question marks, jawbones resting in the shade, vertebrae stacked in odd spirals. It's a strange graveyard, peaceful but eerie, a museum with no walls and no one left to tell the stories. You've reached what some paleontologists call the megafaunal silence, that vast echoing gap left behind when the Ice Age giants disappeared. Not just the sloths, but also their towering tusked friends, the mammoths, mastodons, glyptodons, saber-toothed cats, and the stag moose with antlers like chandeliers. An entire guild of massive creatures simply gone. And now here's the real question: why? Historians still argue whether it was humans' climate change or a terrible cocktail of both that pushed species like the giant ground sloth over the brink. Some believe it was the shifting temperatures after the last ice age. Others point to the arrival of Homo sapiens in the Americas armed with spears fire and a very enthusiastic appetite. There's evidence to support both. Climate records show a warming planet, melting glaciers, rising seas, and shrinking cold-weather habitats. All pretty stressful if you're a cold-adapted, slow-breathing animal. But then there's the timeline. Wherever humans arrived, whether it was Australia 45,000 years ago or the Americas around 15,000, megafauna disappeared suspiciously soon after. Coincidence? Some researchers call it the Blitzkrieg hypothesis. It suggests that early humans swept through continents like a lightning strike, hunting the biggest, slowest animals first. It doesn't help that giant sloths, despite their claws, were incredibly trusting or incredibly unaware. Think of them less as elusive woodland creatures and more like open-world NPCs with no fear script. It's a sad thought, but one worth facing. We might have hugged these creatures right into extinction. Not deliberately, not maliciously, just effectively. To lighten the mood, because hey, this is supposed to help you sleep. Here's a weird fact: in some ancient human shelters, archaeologists have found sloth hide turned into rawhide strips. Sloth leather, slow couture, probably not very breathable. But the human-sloth interaction wasn't all doom and butchery. In some South American legends, sloths are depicted as wise, even sacred beings. There are petroglyphs that show them alongside stars and rivers as if they were constellations walking the earth. Maybe those stories are humanity's quiet way of saying, "We remember you." You walk further into the clearing, and the ground softens again under your feet. A gust of wind carries the scent of warm grass, and something else ashes. You glance around and see the faint, blackened remains of a fire ring. Not ancient, not modern, somewhere in between. Early humans didn't just hunt. They burned, they cooked, they reshaped land. In places like the Amazon, there's now evidence that indigenous people created terra preta, rich, dark soil, made by combining charcoal bone and compost. It still supports vibrant growth today, but the irony, the megafauna that might have helped spread those nutrients by pooping them out across the continent were already gone. Ecosystems changed. Forests restructured themselves. Entire fruit trees, remember, lost their primary seed couriers. Birds tried to fill in the gaps. So did rodents. But it wasn't the same. The age of the giants ended not with a bang, but with a slow, aching silence. And in that silence, humans kept moving. We built things, cities, tools, myths. We remembered sloths in stories and fossils, but never again as neighbors. Still, nature is stubborn. It tries to fill every niche, even the ones left by creatures 10 feet tall with algae in their fur. In modern times, tree sloths returned, not the same kind, mind you. These new sloths were smaller, adapted to a very different lifestyle. Instead of bulldozing forests, they blended into them, lounging upside down with a smug expression that said, "I'm going nowhere." Tree sloths are like echoes of their ancestors, whispers in the canopy of something that once thundered across the plains. And here's a fringe tidbit that scientists are still puzzling over. A few fossilized sloth burrows have been found, especially in South America. Long winding tunnels, some over 100 feet in length and tall enough to walk through upright. Not just dugout hollows, architectural feats. But here's the kicker: those tunnels weren't dug by humans. They weren't caves formed by water. They were built by, get this, giant ground sloths. Not just lumbering snack machines, but subterranean engineers. Maybe they dug for shelter. Maybe for temperature regulation. Maybe they just really liked cozy spaces. Whatever the reason, those tunnels remain vast and quiet, holding the memory of paws and claws, scraping through ancient soil. You pause at the edge of one such tunnel, peering into the cool darkness. The air smells of damp earth and old secrets. For a second, you imagine hearing the drag of claws again. Just for a second. But it's only your breath. Your sloth friend doesn't enter. It waits patiently, then ambles on, past the bones and burrows toward the next patch of sun. You follow. The trees close in again, and above you, parrots screech arguments you don't understand. Somewhere behind you, the silence settles once more, and you realize what's gone isn't truly forgotten. It's there in the seeds we eat, the soils we tend, the myths we pass down. And in moments like this, walking slowly behind a ghost, you feel the landscape shifting under your feet again. Not literally, though. If you were standing here 12,000 years ago, you might have felt a mild tremor from something massive strolling by. But metaphorically, the ground is definitely changing. You're walking into a different kind of forest now. Not the dense, rain-drenched tangle of the Amazon, or the cold, misty edge of Ice Age woodlands, but something a little more open, a little more cultivated. And here's the kicker. It wasn't entirely natural, because in this moment you're stepping into one of the earliest human gardens on Earth, and your guide, funny enough, was a giant ground sloth. We tend to imagine prehistoric people as passive recipients of nature's whims, just hunting, gathering, dodging saber-tooths. But more and more archaeologists are uncovering a different story. Humans weren't just surviving, they were shaping their environments. And the big, lumbering sloths, well, they were unknowingly helping. Let's start with the poop. Yeah, you knew we'd come back to that. Giant ground sloths ate a lot, and they moved a lot. As they wandered through forests, they dropped rich, seed-filled dung in their wake. It was like walking around with a portable garden starter kit. These seeds weren't just random leftovers either. They came from fruiting trees that thrived in nutrient-rich soil, the kind you might find along riverbanks, or thanks to our sloth, right in the middle of the forest floor. And here's where things get interesting. In places like Brazil's Amazon basin, researchers have found groves of fruit trees, peach palms, Brazil, nuts, cacao, that aren't arranged by accident. Their spacing, variety, and distribution suggest something smarter was going on. Historians still argue whether these forest gardens were deliberately planted or just the result of thousands of years of human-sloth-environment interaction. Maybe people noticed where the sloths dropped fruit-rich dung and started coming back to harvest. Maybe they began protecting those areas. Maybe they started tweaking things, planting extra seeds, weeding out competition. In other words, gardening. And if you're rolling your eyes and saying, okay, but sloths weren't farmers, you're right. They were more like accidental landscapers. Imagine a creature the size of a small car with a weakness for avocados, just casually rewilding the earth one bathroom break at a time. But here's the twist, humans were watching and learning. We didn't invent agriculture in one flash of inspiration. It was more like slow-motion collaboration between us and the creatures we lived alongside. And few were more influential than the ground sloths. Now picture this: a young forager barefoot and observant notices a patch of fruit-bearing trees that always seem more abundant than others. She realizes the sloths like to sleep here. Over time, she comes back regularly bringing her family. They clear a bit of brush, maybe toss down a few extra seeds. They leave offerings to the animals, hoping to keep the garden healthy. Fast forward a few generations and voila, you've got a low-tech orchard. A sloth-assisted Eden. It's wild to think that the giant ground sloth, often dismissed as too slow, too stupid, too extinct, may have helped inspire the very idea of farming. But hey, sometimes brilliance comes in slow motion. Now for a quirky side note. Some indigenous stories in Central and South America describe giant forest spirits, shaggy, slow-moving beings, who bring food or teach lessons about patience and balance. While scholars haven't confirmed that these are sloth-based myths, the parallels are hard to ignore. Gentle giants, check. Forest dwellers, check. Powerful yet unhurried, big check. And here's another strange little discovery. In a cave system in Uruguay, researchers found fossilized sloth dung. Nothing new there, but inside it were the remains of a parasite not found in modern sloths, which suggests these ancient sloths weren't just bigger, they were biologically quite different from their modern tree-hugging cousins. Maybe even different enough to carry a few co-evolutionary secrets with them to the grave. It's a reminder that extinction isn't just about losing a body, it's about losing a world of relationships. When a giant sloth vanished, it didn't just leave behind a missing piece of the food chain. It left a gap in the memory of the forest, in the behavior of animals that relied on its movements, in the practices of people who adapted to its rhythms. And yet, in a sense, you're still walking among its legacy. That grove of Brazil nut trees, possibly sloth started. That smooth path through the undergrowth might have once been a sloth highway. The idea of planting a seed and waiting for it to grow, perhaps a lesson taught accidentally by a creature with nowhere else to be. Of course, not all sloth stories end in botanical utopias. Some researchers speculate that as human populations grew more complex, the slow, ambling animals started to become more of a problem. They ate valuable crops. They wandered into villages. They became too easy to hunt. And just like that, their role shifted from partner to pest to prize. The tragedy, if you want to call it that, is that sloths never really changed. We did. Faster tools, hungrier mouths, bigger ambitions. While sloths kept slow dancing with the forest, we began racing towards something else entirely. And here's a little mental image to tuck behind your eyelids tonight. Imagine a giant sloth walking through your backyard, brushing past your swing set, softly nosing through your vegetable garden. It pauses, looks around, and blinks slowly. Maybe it munches on a banana peel you left in the compost. Then it lumbers off, leaving a trail of prints, and a tiny plum tree seed hidden in its dung. You'd call the news. Your neighbors would freak out. But maybe your soil would remember. As the forest opens back up, you step into a clearing flooded with moonlight. The sky is velvet blue, and your sloth companion is already rooting around in a patch of ferns, delicately tearing a few with those thick, gentle claws. You sit nearby, the grass soft beneath you, and you start to wonder how much of what we call wilderness was shaped long ago by animals like this. How much of what we eat, grow, or believe came from patient interactions between ancient people and even more ancient beasts. And maybe the real garden, slow, messy, miraculous was never lost. Just waiting. You're drifting deeper now, both into the night and into a version of the world that teetered on the edge of change. Around you, the trees thin out. The stars above burn colder, brighter. You're in the twilight years of the Pleistocene, when megafauna still roamed but their days were numbered. And standing in the middle of this fading chapter is our old friend, the giant ground sloth. But this time things feel different. You notice fewer footprints. The fresh scat trails, so reliable before, are now sparse. Something is off. You're walking through the ghost of an ecosystem that once buzzed with heavy footfalls and the rhythmic rustle of tree-toppling behemoths. Now there's only the whisper of wind. So what happened? Here's where the debates get loud even if your bedtime tone stays hushed. Historians still argue whether the great ground sloths vanished because of climate change, human overhunting disease, or some grim cocktail of all three. But the result is chillingly clear: they were here. And then they weren't. Let's back up just a bit. Around 10,000 years ago, the Earth's climate underwent one of its most dramatic natural shifts. The last ice age was drawing to a close. Massive glaciers retreated like shy giants, melting and reshaping coastlines, opening new grasslands, turning tundra into forest. To us, it sounds like a triumph. Warmth, growth, a planet blooming. But for the megafauna, it was like someone yanked the carpet out from under their big, slow feet. The vegetation changed. The sloths' favorite leaves and fruits started disappearing in some regions. Water patterns shifted. Forests thinned or turned into deserts. Even their wallowing spots, those cozy mud pits and swampy lounges, began drying up. And if that wasn't enough, there were now humans everywhere. No longer just bands of scattered foragers. Humans were multiplying, experimenting, organizing. With spears tipped in sharpened stone. With fire that cleared entire landscapes. With dogs, yes, dogs as hunting companions. They moved like a force of nature. And let's be honest, a ground sloth wasn't hard to track. They left massive trails through the forest. They pooped in predictable patterns. They moved like sleepy parade floats. You didn't need to be a genius tracker, you just needed to be persistent. Now, before we paint humans as the heartless villains of this bedtime story, remember this: they were just trying to survive. Feeding a village through a harsh winter often meant taking down the biggest, slowest thing nearby. And giant sloths weren't just meat, they were walking pantries. Hide for clothing. Bones for tools. Even their dung could be burned as fuel in dry climates. It was efficient, logical, but devastating. In archaeological sites across South and Central America, we find curious overlaps. Stone tools embedded in sloth bones, char marks on their rib cages, large fire pits surrounded by shattered vertebrae. The evidence whispers of organized sloth hunts, even communal feasts. And while a single sloth could feed dozens, the math was never in the sloth's favor. Low reproduction, high visibility, zero defense. There's one particularly haunting discovery: a fossilized sloth skeleton, found in a Yucatan cave, curled in on itself, almost fetal. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just a creature that wandered into darkness and never left. Maybe it was sick, maybe it was hiding, maybe in a world that no longer welcomed it. It simply laid down and let time wash over. And if you're thinking, surely one or two survived, you're not alone. Some legends in remote parts of the Amazon tell of strange creatures, massive furry tree-breaking beasts that vanish when pursued. Some cryptozoologists, those fringe folks who believe in Bigfoot and lake monsters, have proposed the existence of a living ground sloth hiding in uncharted jungles. Do we have proof? Not exactly. A few blurry photos. Some claw-marked trees. The occasional unsettling howl. But mostly just stories passed down generation to generation. Stories told in the hush of night, much like this one. And here's a strange but true fact: in the late 18th century, explorers in South America found enormous claw fossils buried deep in riverbanks. At first, they thought they'd uncovered the remains of a biblical giant or maybe some ancient lion. When European scientists later studied the bones, they gave them the name Megatherium, literally giant beast. It was one of the first fossil creatures ever described scientifically. That's right, your buddy the ground sloth helped kick off paleontology as a serious field of study. Not bad for a leafy goofball. But back to extinction. As the sloths vanished, they took more than just their hefty footprints with them. Ecosystems collapsed. Certain trees stopped thriving, possibly because their seeds were never dispersed again. Predators that relied on young sloths. Yes, even something as terrifying as Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, lost a food source. Birds that nested in sloth-made clearings had to find new homes. It was a domino effect. Quiet but brutal. And here's your weird tidbit of the night. Some researchers believe that the extinction of megafauna like sloths may have even influenced human religion. Think about it suddenly, entire species vanish from the earth. The animals your ancestors relied on for food, clothing, and myth are gone. What else could explain it but divine will or punishment or transformation? Perhaps those ancient cave drawings weren't just art, they were eulogies. You walk a little farther, your footsteps soft in the moss. Around you, the forest is still. Too still. You sense it now, that long echo of loss. Not loud or tragic, but woven into the quiet. The absence of something enormous. Something gentle. Something that used to shape the world one bite at a time. And maybe that's the real grief, not just that they're gone, but that we barely noticed at first. That by the time we understood what we had, it had already disappeared. But don't worry, this isn't where the story ends. There's a little hope on the horizon. A few footprints still left to follow. The night deepens as you continue forward, guided only by the soft whisper of leaves and the occasional crack of twigs beneath your feet. You feel like a wanderer between worlds, between the past and the present, the extinct and the living. Here, in the shadow of loss, a new story begins to take shape. Because while giant ground sloths might have disappeared, their legacy never truly died. Take a moment to imagine this in a small, misty valley somewhere in the Andes. A team of scientists unearths what seems like an ordinary patch of soil. But beneath the surface, hidden in layers of ancient earth, lie traces of giant ground sloth fur. Yes, actual hair strands, preserved by time like strands of a long-forgotten tapestry. This discovery sent ripples through the scientific community. You might be surprised to learn that scientists can now extract DNA from such remnants, piecing together the genetic code of creatures that vanished tens of thousands of years ago. It's like reading the biography of a creature you thought you'd never meet. With these genetic blueprints, researchers are working on de-extinction projects, ambitious borderline sci-fi efforts to bring back species like the woolly mammoth and yes, even the giant ground sloth. Historians still argue whether this is a brilliant leap forward or an ethical Pandora's box waiting to be pried open. Imagine reviving a beast the size of a small car, slow-moving, peaceful, and utterly foreign to today's landscapes. Would it find a home? Could it survive? Or would it become a museum exhibit on legs? There's no denying the allure of such resurrection. The idea that we could undo some of the ancient extinction's damage, bringing back lost gardens and restoring ecological balance. Some proponents argue that reintroducing giant herbivores might even help combat modern environmental crises like deforestation and climate change. But as always, there's a catch. Sloths evolved to live in environments that have drastically changed since their extinction. The dense, lush forests they called home have been fragmented or lost. Human populations have grown exponentially, sprawling into lands once ruled by megafauna. And no matter how much science advances, reintroducing such creatures raises enormous questions about safety, ecosystems, and ethics. Now, for a quirky twist, in 2019, a group of enthusiasts and paleontologists created a virtual reality experience where you could walk alongside a giant ground sloth. Using detailed fossil data and cutting-edge animation, the VR sloth lumbered through a recreated Ice Age forest interacting with prehistoric humans and other megafauna. It became wildly popular among schools and museums, a digital time machine that brought the ancient world to life. Not quite the same as a living sloth, but hey, it's a start. And while we're talking tech, here's a fun fact. Sloths have a special place in AI research. Their slow, deliberate movements inspire algorithms in robotics designed for efficiency and energy conservation. Slow and steady might not win the race, but it sure does teach machines how to last longer. Despite the glimmers of hope and imagination, the reality remains that we are the heirs to a world shaped by loss. Every ecosystem you see today carries the scars of megafauna extinctions, and every seed you plant, every garden you tend, might echo back to that original slow gardening done by giant ground sloths and their ancient human neighbors. So next time you wander through a forest or sit beneath a fruit tree, remember the ground beneath you might just be richer for those giant beasts' leisurely journeys. Their slow-motion gardening shaped more than just soil. It shaped the story of life itself. And as you breathe in the cool night air filled with the scent of earth and leaves, you realize the giant ground sloth still moves quietly and invisibly through the whispers of the world. You keep walking, feeling the crunch of dried leaves underfoot, the chill of the night settling deeper into your bones. The world around you seems quieter now, almost reverent, like it's holding its breath for the next piece of the story. And this one, it's about the subtle ways giant ground sloths shaped more than just the landscape, they shaped human history itself. You might be surprised to learn that early humans who lived alongside giant ground sloths didn't just hunt or fear them, they interacted with them in ways that hint at a complex relationship. In some cave sites in South America, archaeologists have found ancient art depicting sloths with careful detail, sometimes even showing sloths tangled in vines or reaching for fruit. These aren't mere doodles. They're windows into the minds of people who saw these creatures as part of their world, sometimes as allies, sometimes as challenges. Historians still argue whether these drawings suggest a spiritual reverence or practical knowledge passed down to help survive in wild terrain. Were giant sloths worshipped as symbols of strength and endurance? Or were they simply vital landmarks in the vast and dangerous wilderness? The answer remains tantalizingly unclear. Here's a quirky tidbit for your wandering brain. Some researchers suggest that the footprints left by sloths helped early humans navigate dense forests. Think about it, those massive trails were like ancient highways, marking routes where the thick undergrowth had been flattened. Early humans may have followed these trails to find waterfruit trees, or even to track other animals that frequented the same paths. This idea flips the usual hunter-prey dynamic on its head. Instead of only stalking the sloth, humans might have relied on the sloth's slow, predictable movements to guide their own journeys. It's a reminder that nature's slowest gardeners were in some ways unintentional trailblazers. If you've ever wondered about how humans survived in such wild, untamed places, this connection between humans and sloths offers a clue. The ground sloth wasn't just dinner, it was a living map. But that's not all. Giant ground sloths might have influenced human diets more profoundly than we realize. Their dung, packed with seeds and partially digested plant matter, likely enriched soils in areas where humans gathered food. Early agricultural practices may have benefited from this natural fertilization, helping certain plants thrive. You could say that sloths were the original organic gardeners. And here's a slightly strange fact. Some indigenous South American tribes believed that the sloth's slow nature was a lesson in patience and balance, a quality vital for survival. Slowing down, observing, and waiting were key to thriving in environments where rushing could be deadly. Maybe the sloth's legacy lives on, not just in the earth, but in human culture and wisdom. Now, the academic debates get interesting. While some scholars emphasize human-sloth interaction as primarily practical, others suggest a more symbolic interpretation. Did humans see the giant ground sloth as a spirit guide or a totem? Did it represent resilience in the face of harsh conditions? The jury's still out, but these questions open doors to understanding how humans connect with nature on more than just a physical level. You pause, taking in the soft rustling around you. The night seems to hold secrets of old whispers of footsteps ancient and deliberate. As you listen, you almost feel the slow, heavy steps of the ground sloth nearby, shaping not only the soil but the story of humanity itself. The night wraps you in its cool, velvety embrace. As you continue your slow wander senses, sharpening to the subtle sounds of the wilderness, an owl's distant hoot, the soft scurry of small creatures in the underbrush. You're stepping into a chapter where the giant ground sloth story weaves into the broader tapestry of extinction and survival, a reminder of how fragile life can be. As the Ice Age waned, many large creatures vanished, not just the giant ground sloth. Mammoths, saber-toothed cats, giant armadillos all disappeared around the same time. This mysterious event, known as the Quaternary extinction, puzzles scientists even today. Historians still argue whether this wave of extinction was driven mainly by human activity, or climate shifts, or some tangled combination of both. Imagine the world as a giant clock, slowly winding down after a long cold winter. The glaciers retreat, the weather warms, and ecosystems scramble to adjust. Some species adapt, but many can't keep pace. The giant ground sloths, with their slow metabolism and dependence on specific plants, found themselves on the wrong side of that equation. One fringe theory suggests that these extinctions weren't just natural, but accelerated by a cosmic event, a comet or asteroid impact, that triggered fires, climate chaos, or ecological collapse. The idea sounds like something from a sci-fi movie. But some scientists point to mysterious layers of ancient soot and metals in the geological record as evidence. Still, this remains a hot topic of debate. Your footsteps crunch over broken twigs, and you pause to reflect on how the loss of giant sloths rippled through food webs. Predators lost prey, scavengers lost carcasses, and plants lost their slow-motion gardeners. Some trees and shrubs depended on the sloths' roaming habits to spread their seeds far and wide. Without these giant dispersers, plant communities shifted sometimes dramatically. Here's a surprising fact. Recent studies have suggested that reintroducing large herbivores into modern ecosystems, think elephants or bison, can mimic some of the ecological roles that extinct giants once played. These living giants help maintain biodiversity by preventing overgrowth, enriching soils, and creating habitats for other species. If giant ground sloths still roamed, they'd likely be busy doing this one slow bite at a time. But extinction wasn't just a story of loss, it's a story of resilience too. Some smaller sloth species survived by adapting to forest canopies, becoming the tree sloths you might see today, hanging lazily from branches. These descendants live at a much slower pace, digesting leaves carefully, and moving with deliberate grace. a living echo of their colossal ancestors. And while we admire the surviving tree sloths, it's fascinating to note that they possess some quirky traits that may link them to their gigantic cousins. For example, both ground and tree sloths have extra neck vertebrae, unusual among mammals, allowing a surprising range of head movement. Scientists still debate why this evolved, perhaps a sloth's way of taking in more of the world without expending too much energy. Let's lighten the mood with a gentle joke. Why don't ground sloths ever get lost? Because they always follow the slow lane. As you chuckle softly, you realize that the story of the giant ground sloth is far from over. It's a story told in bones and fossils, in leaves turned over, and in the slow, steady pulse of life that continues despite everything. And with that, you take a deep breath, the cool night air filling your lungs, carrying with it the quiet wisdom of creatures that once ruled this world with nothing more than patience and perseverance. You press onward through the gentle night, your steps blending into the rustle of the trees and the occasional whisper of the wind. The story now shifts to the fascinating details of how the giant ground sloths actually move through their environments. No, they weren't just lumbering monsters, they were surprisingly well adapted for their slow-paced lives. Imagine the sloth's massive limbs, each ending in long, curved claws. Tools, not for clawing at prey, but for ripping open termite mounds, stripping bark, or grasping branches laden with fruit. Their sheer size made them look awkward. But in reality, these claws were like Swiss Army knives for the forest. Their slow movements weren't just a result of laziness. No, they had to conserve energy in environments where food was often tough to digest. Think of it like running on battery-saving mode, always trying to get the most out of every bite. Their metabolism was incredibly slow, meaning they could survive on relatively low-calorie diets while still maintaining their giant frames. Historians still argue whether this slow metabolism evolved as a defense mechanism, making them less tempting to predators, or simply as a response to the patchy availability of food. Either way, it was an elegant solution to the challenges of Ice Age ecosystems. Here's a quirky nugget. Scientists once discovered fossilized footprints of a giant ground sloth that showed it was capable of standing on its hind legs and walking short distances upright, using its tail as a sort of tripod. Not quite the graceful biped you'd imagine, but it gave the sloth a better reach for higher branches. Imagine a clumsy giant swaying on two legs, searching for the perfect leaf. It's oddly endearing. This locomotion style, partly quadrupedal, partly bipedal, is quite unique among mammals. It's like watching a slow dance, a deliberate sway rather than a rush. You almost want to slow your own breathing to match. Another fascinating point, their skeletal structure reveals adaptations for digging. Some species likely burrowed into the earth, creating dens or searching for roots. It's an unexpected twist for creatures so massive. Digging with giant claws sounds messy, but it likely helped them survive harsh winters or evade predators. You might chuckle to hear this, but some researchers have jokingly called the giant ground sloth the original slow-motion bulldozer, given how it reshaped forests and soils with its movements. Not exactly a name fit for a racer, but a fitting tribute to its environmental impact. And while we're on movement, it's worth noting that giant ground sloths likely had poor eyesight, but excellent senses of smell and hearing adaptations that help them detect predators or find ripe fruits. Think of them as the slow, vigilant gardeners of the forest, always aware despite their deliberate pace. One curious scholarly debate asks whether their slow gait was more about safety, avoiding drawing attention from predators, or simply a physiological limit imposed by their size. After all, bigger animals tend to move slower, but the sloths took this to an extreme. You pause for a moment, feeling the rhythm of your own steps, syncing with the story's tempo, as if part of the forest's slow dance. The giant ground sloth wasn't just slow, it was deliberate, patient, and perfectly tuned to the pulse of its world. And as you breathe in the night air, you sense that patience isn't just a survival trait, it's a quiet strength, one we could all learn a little from. The night's cool breath wraps around you again, soft and steady as you delve deeper into a peculiar side of the giant ground sloth story, their role as ancient gardeners and ecosystem engineers. These creatures weren't just passive consumers. They actively shaped their environment, turning forests and grasslands into thriving habitats in their own slow, methodical way. Picture a vast, prehistoric forest, sunlight filtering through dense leaves, the air thick with the scent of earth and greenery. Giant sloths wandered through this landscape, munching on leaves, fruits, and bark, their slow movements, crushing undergrowth and opening clearings. These natural landscapers help maintain a mosaic of habitats, preventing any one plant species from taking over completely. Historians still argue whether the loss of these mega herbivores contributed significantly to changes in vegetation patterns that led to some ecosystem collapses after the Ice Age. Without the sloths' constant trimming and seed dispersal, forests could become denser, less diverse, and more vulnerable to fire. So their extinction might have had ripple effects far beyond what we see in the fossil record. Here's a quirky detail. Giant ground sloths were so important to seed dispersal that some modern plants bear fruit with tough shells and large seeds that seem perfectly designed to survive a trip through a giant sloth's digestive system. It's like nature's own mail service, using the sloth's slow digestion as a delivery mechanism. Some seeds might have traveled miles inside the sloth before being dropped ready to sprout in fresh soil. And here's something fascinating. Researchers have discovered fossilized sloth dung containing intact seeds, pollen, and spores, offering a snapshot of ancient plant communities. This prehistoric compost gives scientists clues about the biodiversity of bygone eras and how sloths contributed to the cycles of life. You might smirk at this while we modern humans agonize over our gardens. The giant ground sloths were the original slow gardeners, happily fertilizing and planting seeds as they meandered. They probably didn't have a gardening hat, but their ecological impact was undeniable. Another interesting note: some scientists propose that rewilding efforts today involving the introduction of large herbivores into ecosystems aim to replicate the ecological role once played by extinct giants like the sloth. By mimicking their browsing and seed dispersal, these projects hope to restore balance to degraded habitats. A lively debate among ecologists revolves around how much of our current ecosystems are ghosts of past megafauna activity. Without these giants, landscapes might look very different, less patchy, less diverse, and with fewer niches for small animals and plants. As you absorb this, imagine the sloth's slow footsteps softening the soil, its giant body creating pockets of light in thick woods, its droppings nurturing new growth. It's a vision of gentle power of life, supporting life in quiet, unhurried cycles. You feel a deep calm settling over you, the kind that only comes from knowing the slow rhythms of nature have been at work for millennia, shaping the world beneath your feet. And in this moment, the giant ground sloth isn't just a relic of the past, it's a symbol of patience, resilience, and the delicate interconnectedness of all living things. The night hums softly around you as you reach the final stretch of the giant ground sloth's journey, a tale that winds through time and space, connecting ancient forests, shifting climates, and the quiet persistence of life. You feel the weight of history, settle gently like a slow, deep breath taken after a long day. By now, you've traveled through the sloth's world, seeing how it moved, lived, and shaped its environment. But what about the echoes it left behind in our modern world? Fascinatingly, giant ground sloths are more than just bones in a museum. Their legacy touches everything from the way we think about extinction to how we understand ecosystems. Historians still argue about what exactly caused their disappearance. Was it overhunting by humans, environmental change, or a complex mix of factors? The truth might lie somewhere in between, reminding us that nature's stories are rarely simple. Here's an intriguing bit to mull over. In some parts of South America, indigenous legends speak of sloth-like giants lingering in remote forests long after scientists believed they had vanished. These stories, whether myth or memory, suggest that the giant ground sloth's influence extended beyond the fossil record into human imagination and culture. You might smile at the thought that despite being labeled slow and extinct, the giant ground sloth still moves quietly through our stories, inspiring curiosity and wonder. In recent years, scientific advances have given new life to these creatures. Using ancient DNA and advanced imaging techniques, researchers are piecing together detailed portraits of sloth biology, behavior, and even their microbiomes. The tiny communities of bacteria in their guts. These studies show how finely tuned sloths were to their environments, offering clues about how species adapt and sometimes fail to adapt to change. And while cloning or de-extinction of creatures like the mammoth captures headlines, the giant ground sloth remains a tantalizing candidate for future research. Imagine a world where we could bring back a slow-moving gardener of the past, not to replace ecosystems, but to understand and appreciate the complexity of life lost. This thought raises important ethical questions and ongoing debates. Should humans intervene in extinction? What responsibility do we have to restore what's been lost? There are no easy answers, but the giant ground sloth story urges us to reflect on these questions carefully. As you prepare to leave this ancient world behind, you feel a gentle pull, a reminder that every creature, no matter how slow or seemingly insignificant, has a role in the grand dance of life. So now, as you settle deeper into your quiet space, remember this: the giant ground sloth story is a whisper from the past, a slow heartbeat echoing through time, inviting you to slow down, observe, and appreciate the world in all its enduring complexity.